Okay, we'll live stream people, so we'll get underway. Welcome to the public section of the Infrastructure and Projects Committee meeting for today, the 3rd of September. We've got a quorum. On Zoom we have Councillor Stewart. Welcome Barry, and we have an apology from Councillor Pottinger. Can I have someone move and second those? No. Thanks second. Darren, and seconded Evelyn. What I'm going to do now, I've asked Evelyn to reflect and take a wee moment for the King that's just passed, the Mary King. So she's going to do that for us. So if you could do that, please, Evelyn.
O tēnā rā koutou katoa e tika ki te mihi atu ki te waka o Tainui, i te heka atu ki te pō o Kingi Pototauta Whero, Tūheitia Pototauta Whero, te tuawhetu. I riro mai ia, i te rekareka o Aitoa, i tērā atu paraire. Nō reira e te kingi, i te āriki o Waikato Tainui, moi mai, oki atu. Although not every iwi acknowledges the kingitanga, we all acknowledge the passing of a leader of an iwi, and Tūheitia, by his actions, by his life's work, is befitting to acknowledge his passing. And for those of you who are in the room and who have received this, the translations for all of this is either on Te Pihopatanga o Aotearoa's Facebook page or Te Runanga Naito's Facebook page. So obviously they're the two people I reference, the Archbishop and Justin Tipa, who is our kai whakahaere. Nō reira, e te āriki, moi mai, oki atu. I te kāhui āriki, i raru i te kapua pauri, i tēnei wā. Ka tino nui te aroha, tino nui te pauri. Aroha atu. Kia koutou, ka nohi ora. Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Just acknowledging the wife, the siblings, the children, the grandchildren, and returning to us, the living. Tēnā rā koutou katoa.
Thank you. Okay, so declarations of interest. Do we have anyone that has an interest in anything we're discussing today? No updates there. Okay, public forum. We do have two guests, but they're not here currently. So what we'll do is we'll move through the agenda, and when they arrive, we'll have them address us. Okay. So first on the item is the meeting minutes of the Infrastructure and Projects Committee meeting held here on the 6th of August. Can I have a mover? Darren, thank you. Leslie, second. Any queries or questions relating to those minutes, please? Okay, there being none, and we've got a move and second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. This next item, tab 5, temporary road closures, Great South Night Food Market. Who's presenting that? Is Doug coming? Oh, is he?
I can speak to that again.
Yes, thanks, Doug. We can't see you, but we certainly can hear you.
It's good to know, thank you. This was a pretty straightforward one. Temporary road closure 28th September for the night market event, very popular event. All safety measures are covered and temporary traffic control and protocols will be followed. If you don't see the questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Evelyn?
Yeah. Is there any reason why Esk Street is not included in this particular event? Because given how busy it was the last time, I would have thought that we might have considered two streets being involved, but that's just my only question about it.
Doug, do you want to, have you got any?
I'm certainly happy to answer the question. I don't think I have an answer, to be honest. We don't guide them, they just apply for the road closure. So it may be a consideration later.
Yeah. I think they alternate, didn't they? They had one later closer to Christmas on East Street, but
Not the night market, and my
No, not the night market,
yeah.
but they had another event there. So
And just given the timing, we're not going to see an application to include Esk Street coming to us
no,
in time to make that decision.
yeah,
I just, probably in the interests of spreading the love, but also acknowledging how crowded parts of Don
Yeah,
Street
it
were
was.
last
Yeah,
time,
that's
that I wondered why there wasn't the drive. But I recognise it's not really
yeah, it's great.
Doug's
Yeah,
bailiwick.
yeah. Okay, Alan, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to say similar things. The other thing, of course, is in Esk Street
Can you can you use the mic, please?
we went to the expense of putting bollards that go up and down there, so you would need a traffic management, the same amount of traffic management. So why don't we use Esk Street, which is actually made for it? I just can't get out. This keeps on happening over and over again.
Yeah, so I think it's Trudy that liaises with Great South. Is it she responsible for that relationship?
That's right.
Yeah, so maybe we could just provide that feedback verbally. Did anyone else have anything else? No, I only had a couple of things. It'll obviously be clearly communicated to the public, and if you could order up the weather like last time, that'd be fantastic, because it was a beautiful night last time they had it. So you'll better do that, Doug.
Yeah, I'll answer, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, any final questions? Oh, Nobby, sorry.
So if we have two streets, does that double up the traffic management cost?
Expect so.
Because I think the management cost is about 2,000 per street.
Yeah. But the alternate thing makes sense, doesn't it, just to try and share,
Yep.
for the next event.
You've also got residential properties in Don Street as well, which you don't
Yeah.
have in Esk Street.
Yeah, so I think we'll provide the feedback and it'll get heard. Okay, mover and seconder. Thank you, Darren. And Nobby, did you have your hand up there?
Yep.
Thank you. No final questions. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Next paper is 6, backflow. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. We're here to present the amended water supply bylaw and the new backflow prevention policy for your consideration as read, and approval to go to consultation. This is to protect the council's network from contamination from an external source. The main point I would note is that council is required to do this as per the Water Services Act 2021 and the Te Mata ROI's Drinking Water Quality Assurance Rules 2022. Michael and myself are here and are happy to answer any questions that you may have for us.
Okay, we've got a few, so we'll go Nobby, then Tom.
Yeah, just two questions. So, Russell, will somebody wanting to buy a property be able to identify through a LIM report or some internal records when they come to buy whether or not the property they're going to buy?
Nobby, can you just speak into the mic?
Oh, sorry,
Pretty
it's
over
subject to either a high or medium risk?
Yes, this should be that way. When they make an application, it comes through our engineering team and they will be able to provide information to them on
Yep.
that.
The second question relates to the untreated water storage tanks, so Otatara obviously, but other areas as well. So 1,500 properties in Otatara. So is it reasonable to assume that most of those don't have a backflow mechanism in them?
That I assume would be correct, but our policy is around our reticulated network. We don't have reticulated network in those places.
So it wouldn't apply?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Tom?
If I'm a householder in Invercargill with an existing house, how will this affect me?
Who will this affect? You want to do that, Michael?
Under the policy, existing residential housing is considered low risk, and so they'll be dealt with last. We're going through a regime of existing houses, there'll be no change. If you were to apply for a new connection, there'd be a slight modification to the type of connection you'd have in there.
So there's no charge on existing householders as a consequence of this policy?
Existing connections with no change, there's no charge.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions on page 5 of the report. or 13 of board book, I think paragraph 3, you talk about risk, about affordability. How will we test that? And how does the policy test that in a way that's equitable and fair in a consistent manner? Have you thought about that?
We're limited with choice there. We're required to apply this to protect the water supply. Obviously we've put it out for consultation. The risk model that we've adopted is based on the building code and Water New Zealand's code of practice.
Yeah.
And so we're certainly interested to see what consultation comes back on that.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying about the cost for us to do it. I'm trying to understand, because I see this as a sort of potentially a blurred line between private property responsibility and rights and us being public.
I can speak to that some more,
Okay.
Chair, if it's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
I think to a little bit to the point that Michael was making is that we've got that national framework that we need to comply with, and it's something that sits under our water safety plans as a requirement for us to implement a backflow prevention policy. How we go about that, there's a few different ways that we can do it, speaking to that point of that line between public and private. So one of the options is that council could take up the option that it's paid for fully by council and the work is done by council. Correct me if I'm wrong, team. That's one of the options we could have done. Or alternatively, we could put it, rather than it being, I guess, borne by all ratepayers, including residential ratepayers, there's the option whereby those commercial businesses that essentially are providing the highest risk to the network would need to fund that protection for the network from their system themselves. So that's the approach that the team have taken, but it's obviously something that we're happy to take feedback on from council.
Yeah, okay. And then, which probably leads to it around, liability. Where does liability sit? So if we're not clear on who's paying or who's doing this, and then there's a health breach around the water because of backflow, then we feels like we're going to be in liability because we haven't done the work. We probably should have known about it, and we can't win either way. Is that a concern we should have, or what's your thoughts on that?
It is a concern. We should have been doing this some time ago. With the new regulations, we've been now doing it since January this year. For all new residential connections, we've been paying because it's as. Where they're on private property, on those larger, more riskier places, the property owners have been paying. So that was our costing funding. So we're assuming that potentially, if it's in private property, it's the property owners, and if it's outside in our network, it's ours. There is a risk around, like the inner city, where the buildings are on the boundary lines. We need to work with those people. You might have gone through Dunedin lately and see some backflow preventions on the property. On the footpaths. That could be a way of doing it, but those large devices will be privately owned. It will just have a permit to be sited on the council property.
Okay.
And I think I'd just add to that point that they are quite a significant device and container that they need to be located in. Russell, can you just provide some context for council, because I think that will be a key impact for us in the CBD.
Yep. So we put one in at Clifton wastewater treatment plant not so long ago because we're probably a high risk site. It's in our property. It cost us $25,000 for a 100 millimetre diameter backflow RPZ device.
And the size of the container?
It was probably what's around 2.5 metres long by about 800 metres wide, 800 mils wide, and it stands about 1.5 high. Those devices have to be above ground because they have to be checked annually and to be certified, and we will hold records of those devices.
Okay. We've got a few others. So we've got Alex, Rhea, Nobby, and then Tom and Evelyn, I think. Yeah, so Alex.
Just a quick question, really. How do you capture new industry? Because in your risk matrix, you've got clearly defined industries, you know, like your funerals and that kind of thing, in the matrix of whether or not they're high risk, medium risk, low risk. How do you capture new industry and people moving around, I guess, in commercial properties when they've already pre-applied and then moved and such?
So while the risk categories identify activities on the site, the overriding thing with that is the consequence of those risks. So if what they're doing on site could result in death, if the contamination was to occur, that would be a high hazard no matter what the activity. Likewise, medium risk is things that will make you sick but not die. So it's really, the activity is the desktop level of looking at things, but further investigation may be required as new things come on board.
Yep. Happy with that?
Yep.
Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russell, thank you for bringing the policy forward. I just have a wee question. Currently, there are some sectors already in the central business and outskirts that are currently using backflow systems in those businesses. So with this policy, and you talking about having out on the street backflow preventions, does that mean that they get taken outside of those businesses that have them inside them to street?
Maybe. An example is ASCO and Miller Street. They've got some RPZs, which are backflow prevention devices, in their buildings. They will be made or asked to move them closer to the boundary, because what we have seen potentially is if you have them too far away, is that somebody could connect to their connection in front of those and join into them. So we will have a policy or a procedure to go around and inspect all those and work with them to move it. Now I know ASCO, I believe, is moving theirs from their building out to the boundary, and we're trying to get them within about a metre of the boundary line.
A supplementary to that, so with that that response, would it be that current commercial area sectors such as hairdressing that have to have backflow systems in their businesses under the health regulations, would they be required to meet those costs because of this policy to move them out to the street if that was the desired result?
So there's some internal backflow preventers that will still be required at the point of use. So that's a building code requirement to protect the people inside the building. The ones at the boundary are to protect the council main, irrespective of what's going on inside the property.
Right.
Okay, thank
So
you.
to answer Ria's question, the ones outside of the boundary would be our air cost, not theirs.
Yeah. So further, last one. How many?
Sorry, I'll just clarify that. They're protecting the council main, but they will be under the current policy at the cost of the business.
Oh, right, okay.
Okay. How many inspectors have we available to check this once this policy goes through?
We are yet to determine how many we need. For example, if we are certifying the large RPZs, that can be done by an external certifier, and they would provide the information to us. For the ones that we will own, which are non-testables, there is no charge to us. Potentially, the only thing that we would do is there is a filter on those devices. If the property owner rings up and says their water pressure is low, we would send our maintenance contract out there to check the filter, and if the filter's blocked, we would clean the filter and put it back again, and that would be a cost. At the present time, we don't know that information.
Okay, thank you.
So just on that, so is that going to be a user pay? So we do inspections, we do cleaning, we're going to bill back? Is that what you're...
For those ones that are on private property, they are as anyhow. So it's only those ones that are within inside the property that they will be done by either a third party, or we might engage ourselves and bill them back.
Okay. Righto. Mayor Clark.
You just wanted to clarify the response that we got from to Tom's question about whether these installations would be retrospective, going backwards. And so when I look at the list, it includes things like residential spa pools. So if somebody doesn't have one at the moment, are they going to be forced to get them, and who pays?
Residential spa pools are dealt with by the building team when they do inspections on them.
Yep.
So if they need point of use backflow at the hose tap supplying it, they'll normally deal with that. In terms of retrospective, we're not intending to go around retrospectively applying these to housing, they'll just be fitted as replaced for replacement connections or new connections.
Yep, and the last issue for me was the issue of the tanks again, which I raised. Some people in town are also, that are in the reticulated system but may not be connected to it, are looking to put in tanks because they want the alternative water supply when the water supply is low. They're drought proofing themselves, I guess, for want of better words. They won't be required to have one if they're not connected to the system.
That is correct.
Okay, yep, thank you.
Tom?
I think the Mayor just actually asked my question, but I'm not absolutely clear. So, when you talked about the fact that, say there was roof captured water system, but it was not connected to, so Otatara being the obvious example. But there is I suppose, if not a trend, at least it's likely to become a trend of roof captured water being used in domestic houses for grey water, for watering the garden and so forth. If there is such a system, how does that get treated under this policy?
I think that's independent of that. That would be dealt with by the building team through the building code for recycling water.
No, what I was meaning was, is there a requirement in that situation for a special device to be fitted for, to prevent any mixing of the waters? I thought I did read something, I've tried to find it, I cannot, but I thought I did read something in this document that said that you do have to.
If you are connected to the city water, you will need one, because it's protecting us from them.
So that's what I thought. So if I'm in a domestic house and decide to capture roof water for, into a separate tank, would I need that special valve connection?
The problem will be that you won't be able to connect a tank supply to your reticulated water, because that pressure will blow the water back through your tank and then you'll lose everything.
But if it's not connected, if the two are not connected...
If it's not connected, you will not require one.
Right, okay, thank you.
I've got Evelyn, then Alan, then Rhea.
Yeah, so I'm slightly concerned because we have a building which I guess is considered to be commercial, but we are not on reticulated water despite being within the city boundary. So should we have had this, I don't even know whether we have because it's a little bit above my pay grade, but should we have provision for this should you decide to extend the network to include where we are? Because I don't understand, we're on tank water because we have to be, but I feel like because we're right where we are, that potentially there'll be other places like us that have some liability to have precautionary processes. Where does that become your responsibility as opposed to ours? Because we were in the situation we were at the time we built.
Yeah, if we extend the network and bring in more development like your properties, we will negotiate with you and tell you. So it's a case-by-case basis. For example, if we extend out to Makarua and the residential houses, they'll be non-testables and council will put those in part of that thing. If we go to a farming area and we have the connection there, we will negotiate, we'll go to the property owner and say, as part of our requirements, if you want our water, you will have to do A, B, C, those sort of things. So it will be a case by case.
And so the follow-up to that is the new development below where we are, between Regent Street and Rockdale Road, Tramway Road, the developer will be responsible for having that. How many boundaries will he have to have it at? Every single mains connection?
Yeah, so every time our network goes into a private property, they'll have one. But if it's, say it's a lane in street that they have 5 houses on a development and there's a single road, we'll only require one at the boundary. But we will be talking to those developers and saying that each property should be protected between themselves. So we will basically work with them to determine how many they need. But effectively, if we have one connection, we will have one device.
Thank you.
Do you want to talk to that, Erin?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that this is simply the staff have worked through where they believe a framework can be put forward to meet the requirements that have been set upon us as a council. What I want to be really clear on is that council doesn't have to accept doing it in this way. Council does have to accept that we need to comply with the backflow requirements. We do have to have a risk-based approach to doing that, and we do need to make sure that there is backflow prevention on those high-risk properties. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that council has to follow the approach put forward in the draft policy. Council could elect to fund this out of rates so that the full cost of doing that is funded out of rates, the full inspections and maintenance, etc., is funded out of rates. However, the proposal that the team have put forward is looking at where they believe the cost is best met, and whether they believe that that should be met by independent businesses or higher risk users, as opposed to the broader rate base. So, like I would say, if council doesn't believe we've got that framework right, we're happy to take feedback around that.
Yeah, I don't think the questions are about we haven't got this right. I just think it's trying to clarify the understanding. And
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know, with all these things where you're changing the way you provide service, which that's what we're doing, isn't it? Through regulation that's been put on us, and it's good regulation because we all want safe water. You know, communication's the absolute key, and, you know, engaging, as you've talked about, engaging with people to ensure that they understand the why, and then the what in terms of how that impacts on them, both initial cost and then service and those other things. So, and I think also, you know, it's a proposed draft policy. We've got a hearings thing, so we would hopefully get some good feedback from various parties that are impacted, and we can refine and reshape or change things that we need to get this as right as we possibly can. But with all regulation, it's a bit of sort of have a best go and hope, isn't it? So, Alan and then Ria, and then we'll close this up.
Yeah, I've just got a quick question. I'm just looking at some of the examples here, and I'm just wondering, why do you need a backflow preventer for things that sort of water pours out of? Because if the water pours out, obviously there is no backflow risk. Like, for instance, a urinal, you know, the water pours out the top. How could that be
It's all around point of between council and the property owner. So the urinal is safe, that's fine, but between the urinal and the property boundary, there is a risk that they could take a connection off and put it somewhere else. So there will be a basin, there might be a bath, there might be, you know, anything around that.
But even those are, you know, also have a tap. You turn it off, there's nothing attached to it. The water comes out, nothing can go back in it.
Yeah, but there could be dirty water in that pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, water's got funny ways of moving, hasn't it?
I would say, I think possibly what Councillor Arnold's talking to, Russell, is the fact that changes in pressure in our network can draw water in different ways than what you'd perhaps expect, as much as a connection from our supply into a residential property should in theory only go one way. I think what Russell would say is that that's not always the case. There is instances where fluctuations in pressure within our network can draw water out of a private property and into the public network.
There's something attached to the pipe, you know, to the tap, wouldn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, physically attached.
Ria.
Yeah, I just don't see how there
sorry.
could be a problem if there wasn't, that's all.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. Ria?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russell, listening to all the conversation already, I'm going back to thinking that when I've had experience of having backflow systems put into my business, and on that initial installation, there's always annual checks with inspectors that come around your business to make sure that it's working as it should. So what I'm thinking about, if with this policy, is obviously there would be more backflow preventions, whether that's residential or to the requirements of what's in your policy. So that's going to put a more demand on having inspectors available. So what you've said, I just need to clarify, is that if we don't have the numbers here for specific certifications, then that will be contracted out?
Yeah, there is a number of businesses who do certifications on RPZs now.
Yeah.
We don't expect that we would rush in and be inspectors. There is enough people out there to do it ourselves. We would hold the information and make sure that the information is provided on a timely fashion.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to deal with, so we've got 5 recommendations. I want to actually deal with 5 first around delegates for the hearings and deliberations panel, 3 councillors and 1 mana whenua rep. So can I have them before we move the rest? Is there anyone that's leaping to put their hand up? All hands down if you want to be involved. Excellent, good. Okay, Tom, Ria, you're keen? Yeah, and I'd be actually probably keen to sit on this as well. So, and mana whenua rep.
Okay.
Pania? Okay, so we've got Councillor Campbell, Bond and myself as the council reps, and mana whenua rep Pania. Okay, so can I have a mover and seconder to receive the report, note the Preventions Policy 24, note the amendments to it, and in particular the definitions of key terms, approve the backflow prevention policy and the delegates. Thanks, Evelyn. Seconder. Thanks, Tom. Any final questions? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, guys. Well done. Okay. Next item 7 is local water done well update from Andrew.
Good afternoon. A presentation to talk through.
Oh yeah, cool.
Good stuff. Okay, so yeah, last time we all gathered and talked local water done well.
Sorry, Andrew, can you just make sure you've got the
Yeah.
microphone up nice and close? They do need to be quite close in this room.
Indeed, indeed. Last time we all gathered and talked local water done well was on the 2nd of July, and that's when we had the piece of legislation and a submission that we all looked at and submitted back to the select committee. So yeah, I'll just hit this, just in terms of the content we're looking to go through today, just an update on the legislation status. We've got a significant tranche of information that's been released by the DIA in terms of policy decisions and guidance information. I'd like to touch on the local water done well working group across Otago Southland, and just give an update on the activities of that group. And then lastly, when you take all of that information, what's the ICC's response and go forward plan with respect to local water done well. I'll just box straight in. Now I know that so in terms of the slides I've got here, it's slightly cut down set compared to what was provided out, just trying to focus conversation, but happy to take questions on any of the information that was circulated. Okay, so in terms of the legislation, the Local Government Water Service Preliminary Arrangements Bill was passed into law yesterday, so that's sort of hot off the press, and that gives us 12 months from that date to complete our water services delivery plans. So officially the clock is now ticking. In terms of the Water Services Bill 3, which is the enduring settings, that's expected in December 2024. But in terms of the fact sheets that have been released that we'll step through, it signals basically the content of that bill. So in terms of, this is a little summary that was actually provided by the DIA as to the 4 sort of, let me just quickly go to my notes here, the 4 areas that areas that are covered off in terms of the new legislation. So white, all the items in white there covered off with the Bill 2, so the one that was just passed into law, and everything in yellow is what's coming through in the new legislation. So each of those links through, I'm not sure if anyone followed the links because there's a hell of a lot of information that sits behind this, but they basically provide a great deal of information as to the enduring settings DIA's term, for the new delivery of local water done well. So the purpose of today is really not to delve into each of those and receive, I guess, form an assessment of the impacts that will come, but it's really just making you aware of the amount of information that's been provided to council and what we're going to do with that information in terms of our overarching process. Okay, so we've already covered off through our previous review of the legislation the importance of water services delivery plans and how fundamental they are. There's a point there in yellow which was added right at the very end of putting the meeting pack together. If status quo meets all requirements, no need to consider assess other service delivery arrangements. So that was off the back of some legal advice that we got informally right at the 11th hour, and then we subsequently received some further legal advice that is incorrect. Status quo, there is a need for the council to consider at least a minimum of 2 options through the new and using the new legislation's assessment process. So whatever the case, council is obligated to consider 2 different proposals for delivering water services.
So I'm just can I just add to that
Yeah.
piece? So that was quite significant for us, because when we looked at the legislation talks about if you are considering moving to a CCO option, for example, it provided what the consultation requirements would be. I certainly hadn't interpreted that as being everybody is required to consider whether they're moving to a CCO and therefore has to consult. And I'd expected that as ICC, as we worked through the water service delivery plans, we would expect to be able to stick with status quo as a sustainable option, and therefore our consultation on any change of options, if we want to go down that path, would come later rather than coming as part of the water service delivery plans. What we've been advised now is that every council will need to consult on the implementation of these water service delivery plans, regardless of whether you are sticking with status quo or whether you are moving to a different delivery model. The impact that that's going to have on ICC, and I've only found this out today, so I haven't even been able to have a chat to Rhiannon at the back of the room, is that we're almost going into another mini long-term plan process on this one, where we will have to take all of that Three Waters information, develop it into this water service delivery plan, which is almost like a mini long-term plan for water, and take it back out and consult with the public on that alone. So we're seeking some more clarity from DIA around that, but that was essentially hot off the press and a little bit of a surprise to us today.
Yeah, keep going.
Sorry, I think he just raised his hand.
Store up the questions.
No, we'll keep moving and then we'll get questions at the end.
Good stuff. Okay. And so just a little more around consultation. So there is the bill provides for joint committees to be set up across districts. So if you're looking at a joint water services delivery plan, to consult collectively and consider the collective benefits, impacts of a proposal across multiple districts. So just as a in the scenario of a joint district, it provides that ability. Okay, in terms of the delivery models, so key point here is minimum requirements. So no matter what, even if water services delivery remains with the council, there are base requirements that new base requirements that need to be met. And those are listed out there in terms of economic, environmental, water quality regulation. So this is sort of covered in a couple of other areas.
I think the key piece to that is that we're not sure what all of these are going to look like yet. It's essentially just that they've been flagged that they are coming, so we'll need to understand those as they come.
Yeah, I won't list through each of those 5, but significant change and further regulatory requirements. Next slide is really just touching on the delivery models that the DIA have in terms of optionality, the delivery models that are available, and there is also the ability for council to consider its own hybrid, if you like. But these are the sort of the 5 core models that were put forward, and there's quite a bit of guidance material there as to the characteristics of each of those models. A very nice one-page summary too, which just breaks out governance, accounting, treatments for each of those 5 models. Key thing to call out here, current council staff and elected members cannot be appointed to boards. That's in terms of the new water services organisations. So they have board independence from council.
Through you, Chair, I couldn't hear that. Could you
Yeah,
say
can
again?
speak up a little bit.
Sure. So additional requirements for water organisations, one of the points that has been raised in legislation, current council staff and elected members cannot be appointed to those boards.
Can it be what, sorry?
Cannot be appointed to the boards.
So they've got to be independent directors.
So there's 6 other points, so it's probably worth me rattling through those. Water organisations must be companies. The activities of the water organisations will be limited to the provision of water services and directly related activities. Only councils or consumer trusts can be shareholders of a water organisation. Board appointments must be competency-based and have the appropriate mix of skills, knowledge and experience. There will be a range of protections against privatisation. So there is a couple of exemptions that are provided through as part of that. Probably not the ones that you're after. Water organisations must be companies. That's potential to be an exemption. Activities of water organisations may be limited to the provision of water services. And there's just a point around a suite of financial products that would be available.
I think just noting that there are some exemptions to that general rule that they've put in place, but generally that's where there's already existing arrangements that are in place in terms of how organisations are running their CCOs that the legislation's looking to enable, but those sort of general rules apply, and with the exception of a few limited circumstances.
Okay, next piece is around financing. So I'm not sure if you've seen in the news, but LGFA has provided revised water services specific financing options for these new water services companies. So subject to criteria, these new water CCOs can borrow up to 500% of operating revenues, which is greater than of councils. And basically the summary is that all of this information will need to be factored into our options analysis as to which of these models best suits council. I know I'm skimming through some quite detailed information, but next piece is economic regulation. So these are the suite of tools that will be afforded to the Commerce Commission. So yeah, a stack of new reporting requirements which will be required of the new entities.
Sorry, Andrew, I'll just clarify, not just the new entities, that these reporting requirements for the economic regulator will also apply to councils that decide to keep their Three Waters delivery in-house.
Yeah.
So anybody who's providing water services, whether it be a council or an entity, will be subject to these reporting requirements.
Yeah, so those sort of salient bullet points there are the purposes or objectives, if you like, of that regulation. On top of that, we have under Te Mata Arawai, the water quality regulator, new wastewater standards being implemented, and modifications to the water quality regulations as well. So those have already been sort of signalled through current legislation, but that's the other sort of moving piece. I'll pause there.
And I think we'll just keep working through
rolling?
the presentation,
Yeah.
and then we can have questions at the
Sure
end,
thing, yeah.
Andrew.
Okay, so in terms of the Otago Southland work streams, I think we've provided just an overview of the work that the Otago Southland Local Water Done Well Working Group has been working on. 3 streams of work: regional collaboration and shared services is really just about those easy, quick wins that we can do around regional collaboration. The more meaty piece of work that the team's working on is the regional delivery model, which is really factors into what are the alternative delivery methods that the region can consider. And then the third is just looking outwards as to wider than the region, what is happening. That's where we have Ngāi Tahu and the Selwyn offer on the table to consider. So I'll just step through in terms of the progress of that group. I'm going to flick to Erin on this one. Proposed investment objectives. We've defined a set.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I just asked Andrew just to give me an opportunity to speak to this one. So some of the work around the regional delivery model has been looking at following essentially a very short form accelerated business case process. And the reason that I wanted to talk to this one is that I think it's quite important for ICC to consider going forward with any thoughts that we may have around what we want our future to look like from a water perspective. Is that I think it's really important for us to make sure that we go through a process to debate and set the objectives for what we want to achieve with water going forward. And the reason that I guess I'm so passionate about that is that I think we've seen from our history on our project delivery, and I think, as much as this is an operational project, this is going to be a very chunky project for council to decide what we're going to do in terms of pulling together our water service delivery plans, is that those projects where we haven't done the hard work up front to decide what is it that we think's not working well, what do we think the opportunities are, and what we want to set those objectives that we can keep scoring ourselves back against to understand how are we going as we work through a process and make sure that we're staying on track. The projects that have gotten off track, and those projects where we did that hard work up front to set what we wanted to achieve have generally been those that we've been much better able to keep on track. And I think one of the examples I'd use to illustrate that would be the museum governance group process, and the fact that I think there's been several times as we've gotten to the really hard points on that journey where we've very much gone back and looked at the museum governance group process and gone, what did we set out to achieve and how do we currently make sure that we stick with alignment to that. So I guess in terms of us taking that forward, I think this is work that's being done by Otago Southland. I think regardless of where we go as Invercargill City, this will be good work for us to feed in as well. So I guess what I'd ask Council to consider is whether or not those proposed investment objectives are things that resonate with you, or whether or not as we start to move forward we think we need to do a piece of work to develop our own objectives. That's not something that we need to decide today, but definitely keen to get some feedback around that over time. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got those draft set of investment objectives. They have been put forward through the CEs, and we're looking to use those as the basis for assessing the a long list down to a medium list to a short list to a preferred roadmap for regional collaboration. So the next slide is really just to provide an indication. It's a little difficult to read from this distance, but as to the number of moving parameters that are available to inform a long list. So there's, in terms of on the left axis there, service scope, service solution, the service delivery model, implementation model, and funding options. And as the working groups progressed, it's really with the service delivery axis, if you like, has really come to the fore. That's one of the most important determinants, if you like, as to a short list. Next slide, and this is sort of hot off the press because it's we've got a medium list of options that have been identified. The formatting's gotten a little mixed up, but starting at the very top there, the least formal, if you like, and through to the most formal arrangements. And the working group is really at a point now where we've refined that down to a short list, and looking to present that through to the CE Mayoral Forum in the next CE Forum for first week of October, with supporting financial analysis behind it. So yeah, and just in terms of timeframes, so the working group has put a information request out to all the councils to source financial information to feed into the modelling, and so that will be modelling status quo. So if councils maintain water services delivery in-house, what does that mean against the criteria that's and requirements that have been set for us by the DIA, through to what does a full all councils in a council-controlled organisation, what does that look like if we all collaborate and deliver and put all our assets? So the two extremes, and then really I guess the key thing to note is that the working group will then need to take direction as to, once we've put that roadmap out to the individual councils, where does each council see themselves on that roadmap? Is it status quo, or are they interested in collaborating in forming joint water services entities with other councils? So in essence, the ball will be in the council's court to let the working group know what they want to do. I've sort of touched on the national collaboration. So we're, as part of the information gather for Otago Southland's financial modelling, we've combined the data request with that of from the Selwyn District Council, so the information gathered will satisfy both groups, and we've sought CE approval to share that information into the Selwyn financial modelling exercise. There's no cost to it, and we would be looking to receive an output of that, of what are the collaboration options and opportunities at a wider context. So it's just putting more options on the table for consideration with no cost. Forming an ICC view. This is where all the rubber hits the road in terms of there's a lot of moving pieces. There's quite complex set of legislation and DIA requirements to navigate. Water service, we had a session with the DIA literally this morning where they released a template for their water services delivery plan and guidance information, and talked us through that. We're facing quite a significant information gather, analysis, options assessment, public consultation exercise. Probably flick to you, Erin, as to magnitude. You'll probably be able to communicate it better than I.
Yeah, I think probably just the key piece that I'd add is that we've been as much as we've been progressing the Otago Southland work, there's been almost a little bit of a holding pattern for us as we were waiting for that bill to come into legislation, and which has now happened, and essentially that clock now starts from now, whereby we'll have 12 months now to do the work that we need to do around delivering the water services delivery plans. Now, what I would say is that we don't necessarily have to be saying that our model is different at the end of the next 12 months. We may simply advise that this is our current model, these are options that we would be looking to explore, and we need to meet that sustainability criteria for 2028 to show that essentially that we're able to meet those financial and regulatory requirements going forward. Essentially we'll now start to form a team internal to council to start looking at those plans, and keen to take feedback from council around timing from council's perspective around if and when they might like a workshop around what options may be available to council to discuss that in more detail if they wish.
Okay, questions? Tom, then Mayor Clark.
So there are two, seems to me, critical pieces of work which are going to be running in parallel. One is the development of the water services delivery plan, and the other is deciding on the delivery model that we are going to go for. And of course, in terms of elapsed time, I mean, both of these look to me to be very lengthy conversations, but we've actually got to deliver the plan within a year, as I understand it. And given that, you know, we will have a new council come next October that will be starting from scratch, and even given that, you know, in the last couple of months of this triennium, it's difficult to make real progress. It would seem to me that we'd want to be in a position to have the delivery plan, which is mandated. We've got to do that. We'd have the water services delivery plan completed by kind of July next year or something like that, so in about a year's time. And I note that although there are various delivery options that I mentioned, I think it's 5, isn't it, if I remember correctly, you can move from one to the other. Absolutely. Readily, right? So that, for example, given the shortage of time, we could develop the delivery plan on the basis of a status quo. As I understand what you said at the beginning, we would then need to consult on the basis of 2 delivery models, which you could do as part of that, but you wouldn't have to finalise it by that point. But the water services delivery plan could be developed, you know, pretty much starting now on the basis of status quo. And we could still have in mind that we could move to some other model at some point after that. I'm sorry, that's not quite a question, Chair, but it does seem to me that particularly the delivery plan has got the potential to be a debate amongst the councils that will go on for a long time. And if we were going to do them sequentially, so in other words, develop the delivery model and then start developing the delivery plan, then it's going to stretch out beyond next year, I would have thought. Sorry, that's not really quite a question.
I think the only piece that I'd just add to that is that with the legislation now coming into effect, we've just been advised, and Andrew and I have started to look today, that the guidance documents around the templates, etc., for the water service delivery plans have now been released online, which means we'll work through all of those requirements. Our expectation is that Invercargill City Council will be able to put forward a status quo option that meets those requirements, but obviously we'll need to work through whether there's anything unexpected in those requirements for us, and provide council back advice as soon as we've done that.
So just with respect to the time frame, and I think Tom raises a really good point that we do need to leave the incoming council, which will be October next year, with very clear sort of position that's been considered by this council. So Tom sort of talked through July 25. Can we land there, and if so, what's the process and how can we get some real clarity around what we've got to do between now and then to land at that sort of July period? What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, so again, if it's simply a matter of taking forward the status quo, then as I said, we'll work through that. However, if council, by the sound of it, is indicating that it would like us to take it through a process of looking at whether there's other options for delivery that might provide greater efficiencies to the ratepayers of Invercargill, then absolutely we can come back with essentially a project plan for how we would look to take council through that process between now and July next year.
Yeah, so my view, but I'm happy to hear from others, is that we absolutely need to be very clear on the options of delivery models. So workshop there, and then working through, that preferred option or the 1 or 2 preferred options to try and land in probably July, is what I'm thinking. But we need to have a robust process. We need to give consideration to the options and then try and push up against the wall of July next year to be able to land it.
And I think the key consideration, Chair, with that will be if we are considering options, we'll need to make sure that we include that within sufficient timeline to do the consultation, public consultation around the water service delivery plans. So we can absolutely map out a project plan to meet those timelines.
Yes, I'll be keen to get some feedback from you where you're speaking. So sorry, Alex, I had you down first, so I'll come to you and then I'll come to me, Clive.
Yeah, thank you. We've been speaking about Three Waters for what appears like to be like the last century. It's been very ongoing. When the first announcements from the previous government came out along the timeline, they had a water services reform support package, and you'll know, like, we've had a dip into that funding along the way. Now that we've got the water services delivery plan, and we rate for what we rate for water currently, this is going to put significantly more pressure on our resourcing as we have, working with our regional peers and such. Has there been any announcement around government support in assisting us to get to a future point? Because, to the Deputy Mayor's point, it's going to take quite a long time to get these conversations out there in this debate, whether or not we do work with our regional partners or not, and even just deciding around this table.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good question, and it was one that was put by multiple councils on a call with DIA this morning. This is absolutely a significant piece of work for any council, including our council, to undertake. The fact that we've just finished a long-term plan and we're almost being sent back into another mini long-term plan process is in some ways not particularly helpful to us. We have raised the question around whether or not there will be government funding, or for that matter government resourcing, to support us through that process. What we've been advised is councils who still have any of their transition funding or any of their better off funding that they haven't used yet are welcome to use that, and we are still funding the remainder of our better off funding for this process so far, but essentially any council who doesn't have that funding, or once that funding runs out for us at ICC, it will simply be up to us to deliver that ourselves. There's an expectation, I think, from DIA that councils already have this information and that they can simply pull this together with a modicum of effort. I think there's probably a little bit of a lack of understanding of the fact that we essentially sort of have to put a lot of our activities on hold whilst we work through the long-term plan process. That takes all of our focus, and then we have to play catch-up again at the end of the long-term plan process to pick up all those other pieces of essentially asset management work that we need to do going forward. We won't have the opportunity to do that now. We are simply going to have to keep things work on hold and turn our attention to these water service delivery plans. And that's a little bit tough because it means that the good work around wanting to take forward our networks and our assets perhaps won't get the attention that we would have liked whilst we do this piece of work. But no external funding at this stage, and also, as much as DIA have advised us that they're happy to review early drafts of the plans, that they're happy to provide guidance to us, they've also qualified that with the fact that they are a very small team and do not have a great deal of resource to assist.
I guess my greater concern, and thank you very much for the explanation, because you've pretty much identified exactly my concerns in the outset, but my greater concern is more around the fact that we now have to go out for consultation again in a situation or in a community where we'll already have quite a lot of consultation fatigue.
Absolutely.
And we actually we're imposed to have to do that from the government when the conversation will still look like it's coming from council, and the conversation will be, like whether or not we go with status quo, or whether or not we compile with our regional partners, or whether or not, even just the CCO conversation to some people can look like privatisation. It can get really uncomfortable conversations. So I'm just really sensitive about that communication piece.
Yeah, no, they're good points, Rose. Just to loop back, so we have got some residual funding that was available to us that we can use for this, but we're going to burn through that pretty quick.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Mayor Clark, did you have something on that point?
Sure. I sat through the webinar this morning, and it was really good because it helped clarify for me that we need to stop doing the Otago Southland model, we need to stop doing the Takiwā model, and we need to stop doing the Selwyn model. Our future lies with a very simple outcome, which is that we should put in front of our community a standalone option or an Invercargill City Council CCO. Now the question then becomes, why would you have an individual CCO for one council? Well, there are two reasons. One, it allows others to join at a later date, as Tom said. But the other side of it is it future-proofs our risk against government putting a cap on rates, which you've heard announcements made by the Prime Minister and the Minister for Local Government recently. If we have a CCO, we can still fulfil our obligations to local water done well, because we have that CCO sitting out there that can borrow independently. Being mindful that whichever way you govern this, borrowing debt still needs to be satisfied, so you've still got to pay the money back. It was interesting today. I thought up until today we've had a top-down model. So we've had iwi present issues to us, Selwyn has, Otago Southland have been hounding us to death, so poor old Aaron's been doing a whole lot of work to try and facilitate some sort of mediation between the warring factions that sit within that cluster of Otago Southland, where in fact the government's been really, really clear on us. This needs to be a bottom-up model. So I don't think it's as onerous as staff would lead us to be, and I'm open to being convinced otherwise, that if we sit back and do a standalone, Aaron already said before, that's not too onerous, given today that they said there's 2 steps in doing these plans, and 2 steps only. One is to disclose information, which means you need to upgrade your water, you need to identify where you want to go in the next 10 years, possibly 30 if you're brave enough to do that. I wouldn't suggest that because we've got, it's a bit of a crystal ball looking forward 30 years, but a 10-year plan and how it would be funded. And then stage 2 is, what model do you want to deliver that? And we're probably as close to being standalone as probably any council in our region. So we should head down that track, but the first step is not identifying the model. The first step is identifying what our forward 10 years looks like. And so until we've done that, you can't decide or consult. Being mindful that the consultation comes in stage 2 of 4. So the first piece of the work is to identify what do we need in 10 years, what's our borrowing capacity, do we have an ability to fund it? Then it comes back to the issue I raised before about, does that put us at risk if we've got a rates cap sitting above us, which might be close to the inflation rate? Could we do both what we want to do in the city and 3 waters going forward? The other interesting thing that came out of today's webinar was that this is more than fresh water. It is actually 3 waters. And the department acknowledged that the plan needs to identify wastewater and stormwater. And then they, at the end of that, said, we acknowledge that stormwater is a very difficult area to manage going forward in these plans. So that's a bit of a grey area for us. But I don't think it's as onerous as it needs to be, so long as we put aside what we're currently doing for Otago Southland and for Selwyn and just get on and do our little bit. It was really interesting. They said the first chunk of the work in stage 1 is based on financials. So, you know, planning what you're going to do for 10 years and what's your financial capacity. And they said you need to look at long-term plans, you need to look at your asset plans, and you need to look at your financial accounts. And the financial accounts really mean what rates have you got coming in, being mindful we're talking about water rates, not general rates. What revenue do you have, what investments are sufficient, and what's your capacity to raise debt and service that debt, given that we're in a pretty healthy position for that. So I think that's the way forward. We should start with just worrying about ourselves, not worrying about the other things. I think somebody down here raised before that if we start talking about getting into bed with Otago Southland, we'll be here not this Christmas but next Christmas still arguing about it. The deadlines are that we need to have stage 1 done, or they recommend stage 1, which is our 10-year look and our financial capacity, done by Christmas time, so that's fairly close. And then we need to look at what models we can have to deliver that, and I'm predicting that'll be standalone or an Invercargill CCO, which others can join if they wish to. so we can be a bit of a leader in that space. And that, as you're saying, Grant, needs to take us through to about a third of the way through the year so that we can get some decisions. Doing it too close to the deadline, which is September next year, will be a disaster. So we need to rethink. I noticed one of the models we had up there, we had the 4 well-beings up there, and the 4 well-being investments. The government's already announced in the last 7 days that they are removing those 4 well-beings from local government. So that slide, I guess, is a little bit superfluous. So that's my take from this morning's thing. I think we've still been focusing on top-down. What models we got that could help us, we should be doing it the other way around. What do we need, and then what model can we go? And that's clearly the message from DIA today.
Great. Yeah. Okay.
And that's me done. Thanks for that time.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Look, I'm sort of really stuck on the water service delivery plan part, which is about financial sustainability, because given that 2 out of these 3 strands don't actually generate income, they just cost, so that's wastewater and stormwater, we're really looking at how we fund freshwater. In other words, how we charge for it, because that in rates is what's going to be. But then we have to take our money and put it into this separate little ring fence little. I find this quite alarming, because there's going to be pressure against doing properly the things that don't generate income. We probably, we know both of our wastewater treatment plants have got extensive work to be done and costs entailed, but we also have liability within our stormwater system, and I don't see how being able to raise the money at 500% of borrowing is actually going to help us, because that's going to cost. But how do we generate the money to pay the debt when 2 out of these 3, which are possibly the most expensive parts, because they're the bits that we've got to invest in most imminently, don't generate income, or not significant income?
I think one of the things I'd just clarify around that is that there's not necessarily a specification between generating income via user charges and generating income through a flat fee. So both our wastewater and our stormwater services also generate income for us to pay for those. It's simply that it's generated only through rates. Whereas water, we have an element of user charging in some, user pays in some instances. So it's not necessarily that we have to move towards user pays for all areas, and I'd note that there's a number of councils that do user pays for wastewater as well, essentially based off a formula for water charging. But it's more around making sure that however you get that income, whether it's through a flat fee or whether it's through user pays, is sufficient to fund the program of upkeep on your network and your assets, is essentially what they're looking at. So far we've not been advised that there's a requirement for that to be through direct user charges versus a flat funding model. But simply that they must balance out, and you must create sufficient revenue to be able to fund your requirements.
I think there's going to be a real challenge in selling this to our community, because to me it talks about financially able to meet all regulatory standards. It says revenue applied to delivery of water services is sufficient, all those things. But it talks about revenue, assets and liabilities must be ring-fenced, which means to me it seems like you have got to be able to prove that what you do you can afford to pay for, which is no different than we're in now, except that we're being enticed with the idea that we can borrow extensively to do what needs to be done. I worry about how we are going to justify to the ratepayers that we are going to be able to pay for all of this through a CCO or whatever we decide to do. But perhaps there's wiser heads than me that can work it out.
Yeah, look, I think you've segued into a really important point, which is, you know, we need to get our heads around this, which says we absolutely need to have a really good workshop which covers all the options, and there may be a view that, you know, this particular option is the only one we've got. But I think from a governance level it's important for us to be aware of what those other models are and why they don't work for us, and some of the challenges you've raised around revenue. Okay, what implications or impasses does that present to us? So Michael and Erin, and Nobby's got a question, so I'll give you some time when you think about this, but I'd really like to hear from one or both of you around, okay, well, where are we heading to now? What would we expect next? Would we expect something back to come and say, well, here's what we're going to do to get to our July 25 date, and this is the process we're going to work through to address some of the concerns that have been raised around this table and push this thing forward, and so we can land in July 25 with very good clarity around what is best for our city. And so if you want to answer that now, you can, or do you want me to go to the Mayor and then come back?
Through yourself, Chair, look, difficult to answer right at the moment. Like, as you've just heard through the presentation, there's a lot of information come out over the last couple of days.
That's right, yeah.
Which has given us more clarity in relation to what the requirements are. As a council, we need to work through what that means and give a timeline out the other end. The other side is around the consultation. You've just heard that, and we've just heard that. We just need to work through how we fit that into a timeline to meet a 12-month deadline. So we'll be working on both of those aspects to have a timeline back to council as soon as possible.
So would it be fair and reasonable to expect at the next infrastructure meeting that we have that paper that outlines time frame and those sorts of things? Is that a reasonable request on staff?
I think it's reasonable provided all of the information is there for us, so yeah.
Yeah, okay. Mayor Clark, did you want to have
Sure.
a final say?
Just wanted to add to what Evelyn raised. Probably the most difficult discussion piece that we're going to have, if we ever do want to have it. The issue was not how do we generate income, it's how do we decrease costs. So, here's some things to ponder on. Auckland uses 25% per capita the fresh water that we use in Southland. And why is that? Because they have to pay for it. They have water meters sitting in every house. You pay for what you use. That forces people to use less fresh water. Less fresh water means less treatment at the front end and more water during drought periods. Water meters also make it very easy for staff to identify where the leaks are in the system. We lose about 30% of volume through leaks, and that's conservative. Wellington loses 50%. And of course, if you put less volume into the front end, you get less water coming out in the waste end. So that decreases your cost as well. And the last government gave us a really interesting piece of information. Our water rates are roughly $800 per household per year. Auckland's also $800. Over the 10-year span of the previous 3 water information we got, our water rates were going to go up to somewhere between 1,800 and 2,300, depending on who you believe. So nearly 3 times up. Auckland, during the same period, $800. 10 years from now, $800.
Yeah.
So that's the key. The key is how not to try and reduce more. And because Evelyn's quite right. If we borrow or use debt to pay for increased costs, we have to pay. And the communities that are on the lowest household incomes will hurt the most. The alternative to that is to decrease the volume of what we put into the front end.
Yeah.
And to sort the leaks out. But there is a cost for putting in water meters.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, no, we need to work through those implications and options, don't we? Okay, so no more questions or input. Don't think we've got everyone. Thank you very much, Andrew, for presenting that.
Thank you.
It's a really important piece of work, so thank you for leading it, and keep up your fluids and energy levels.
Have the reports received.
Yeah, thank you. Darren, can I have a second of that, please? Thanks, Leslie. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, so tab 8, the Bluff wastewater consent, alternative water and Clifton wastewater update. So this is an update. I don't think there's anything new in this particularly. So I'm going to enforce standing orders pretty thoroughly here. So you'll get one opportunity to speak if you're going to speak, and that's it. We've got a workshop coming up, and that's where we're going to sit on this one. So choose your words carefully. Any questions or discussions? Or do you want to roll through it?
No, I'm happy.
It's an
It's
update.
simply an update with the associated dashboards there. I'm not sure, I can't quite see if we've got Alistair online. Alistair, are you there? No, I know he was trying to get on, but he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to. But no, happy to take any questions, Chair.
The only other thing I can talk about was that last night at the Bluff Community Board meeting, they requested a workshop for that community board, and we landed on a date with that, didn't we?
We did Monday the 16th.
Yeah, so that they're going to have a really good dig into that, and I think that's really important because this impacts them as well. So. Okay, Mayor Clark and then Evelyn,
Sure.
and then
Got 3 questions.
Alex.
Just wanted to get confirmation of the next workshop date. So it has been changed.
Yes, so obviously we had the consulting team available. That date was asked to be moved, so we're just trying to get a date that will work with that consulting team. What I'm conscious of is that there is no Tuesday available for a workshop between now and November, as council's fully booked up. So we will need to be looking at a date other than a Tuesday. So as soon as I've just provided a range of dates back to the consulting team, and as soon as I've got some options, we will work with governance to get that locked in ASAP. But it will need to be ahead of the next infrastructure and projects meeting. We just want to make sure that we're outside of that period around the school holidays as well, which is also causing us some constraints.
Okay. On page 96, Aaron, there was reference in the dashboard to the scoping that you're currently doing, leading us up to some decision making around the multi-criteria assessment being as a $1.12 million cost. Is that right?
That's right. So the process to get us through to submitting the consent, we've developed a budget around that process. As I think I've said at council at the committee meetings before, at the moment this is not a live project that we're delivering. It's essentially an operational scoping and consent application, and that is the budget for that application process through to consent lodgement.
Yep. 2 other quick questions. Good to see that there's a consultation going on with the Bluff Community Board. At what stage of the process does the wider city consultation occur?
So the wider city consultation would occur once the working groups developed their recommendation. That would then come through to council to consider, and then council would, depending on whether or not we believe that we've triggered the significance and engagement criteria, council would then have a decision to make around public consultation.
Final one for me, which is a process I haven't been involved with before, so bear with me. I noticed in the initial consultation we consulted with Tammy and with the Awaru Runaka. We've got differing views coming from those 2 sources. How does that play going forward?
So I might take a staff view of it, and then Michael may or may not wish to add anything else. Essentially, at the moment, I'm working with the working group around their views. That then goes up to, I guess, the governance group within the Runanga, as well as obviously to the governance group for council. And essentially council will make a decision around what council wants to take forward, and my understanding of it is that the Runanga will make a decision around how they want to proceed once we get to a consent lodgement state. So as much as they are working as part of the process, they've always been clear with us that from a governance perspective, them working with us doesn't impact their governance rights when it comes to the consenting process.
Understand that. Sorry, there was a last question, which was I noticed somewhere in the last day or so that there was some suggestion from staff that we would initiate doing some work on the Clifton consent either this year or early next year. To me, that's somewhere between 4 and 5 years before the consent runs out. I'm just trying to understand or rationalise why we'd be going so far in advance, given that we may have a change of government at that time.
So in terms of the Clifton project, it's a little bit different to what the Bluff project is. We definitely have pressure from Environment Southland around the Clifton consent and the discharge into the estuary, which means that there's much more likely to be environmental monitoring that we will need to do to inform our consent application, and that may be years of environmental monitoring that we'll need. So this is more around, we'll look to form an initial working group to give us some advice around what steps we need to take through that process. If they advise us that we don't need all of that time and we can essentially stand down for a period, we will, but we want to make sure that anything that's going to have a long lead time we know about and we don't wind up running late.
Okay, thanks for that.
Michael, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you through yourself, Chair. I just wanted to clarify one point that was raised in relation to Te Marama and consulting with them. They're actually our partner in relation to the 4 councils who have provided funding to actually enable us to work through the obligations and requirements in relation to the RMA, and they're working with us and for us on a lot of projects that we have in relation to all 4 councils. So we're not technically consulting, they work us through our as a partner, and they help us engage with the Runanga in consulting. So not that way around. Just wanted to be clear on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Evelyn.
Put some sense to the table.
They're a heartache to follow. And surprisingly, I'm not going to talk about the wastewater. I've just got some questions about the alternate water supply and raising some concerns about the pressure that's going to come on us, as indicated in the last sentence of the report, approaches from Calder Stewart Developments and Tallies about, have they indicated to us approximately how much water each of them thinks that they're going to need, and what does that mean in terms of our current supply that goes to Bluff as independent from the discovery of alternate water, which was not supposed to be providing water for these developments?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's 2 pieces to the alternate water project, and there's the fact that it started as an emergency supply project and then we morphed it into an alternate water supply project. And essentially what that means is that our critical, I guess, risk from a council perspective is around that emergency supply and what happens if we have a contamination or a lack of supply from our Ariti River supply, and making sure that we've got an alternative for the city. But it's also around, once we'd worked through the options and it looked very likely that the Awarua site was going to be the most likely site for us to develop, then we've got a number of constraints on the south of the city, which we could still feed from the north via that Ariti River supply, but it's a question of whether it makes better sense to serve that southern arm of the community via a southern supply rather than bringing it all the way around from the north of the city. So I think we've got essentially that base, I guess, reason for the project is around emergency supply, but we also want to understand whether or not the source can provide us sufficient water for it to be a dual supply and essentially have those additional benefits to the city out of establishing it. So at the moment, the budget that we have in place sits somewhere between the two options, between a straight emergency or a full alternate water supply, which simply reflects the fact that we're still essentially going through that proving process as to whether or not that's going to work for us. In terms of the approaches that we have from industry, we know that there is commercial development that is looking to be set up in the south of the city, and that council's being approached around that. They are giving us indications for water volumes, and we know that those are water volumes that the city supply via the pipe restrictions we have in the network cannot currently provide them with. Some of the options that we're talking to developers about are whether or not we look to stage that development, because one of the things that I don't see as being good for the city is if there are us and several commercial entities all looking to drill bores on their own respective sides of property all into the same aquifer. I'd much rather see us, if there's a demand for water, that perhaps we work with those private developers on a stage one that meets their needs, that is perhaps co-funded by them, given that council doesn't have the money available in the long-term plan to progress the supply just yet, and look at how that could be put down, vested across to council, and then we wind, I guess the benefit to that is that the private developers don't have to look to maintain that long term, but also that council has a better risk profile around that aquifer and what's happening with that supply. So those are the conversations that we're essentially having at the moment.
So can I follow up on that then? Are we at risk of, no, I'll turn it around. Would it be better if we just said, okay, commercial entities, you do that, and reserve the water that we have to supply our ratepayers as opposed to commercial entities, so they take the risk of aquifer sustainability and all those sorts of things rather than council investing in it. I'm just really mindful that there's potential for this investigation to end up being servicing purely commercial entities and not actually servicing the wider ratepayer base, and that I think was a bit alarming for me.
What I would say is we've already got significant restrictions on our network into Bluff. So if we were looking at much more volume going into Bluff at all, we'd be struggling to supply that. So yes, there's the question of commercial development, but there's also the question of further residential development towards the southern corridor there. So I think we need to be looking to both of those elements. And one of the things I'd say is if we're not looking to service the commercial development in the south of the city, then I guess my question would be around those commercial developments elsewhere in the network, and how do we make sure that we balance those fairly, rather than it simply not being enough water once you get past a certain point in the network.
I hear your concerns, Evelyn, but equally it's also a pleasant problem to have that we've got demand for commercial uses because of the the economic impact that has. They provide jobs for our community and those sorts of things. So, but we have to balance it, I think, is what I'm hearing from your conversation. Got Alex and then Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, like to your point, I think, Mr. Chair, and I do understand your concern, Reverend Cook, but if you took the commercial development out of our articulated network, then it would alleviate, and serviced it with one aquifer, you'd obviously alleviate the rest of the network for the residential. But there's also a risk that if you put commercial development on its own and they have to onboard their own systems themselves, that's, I guess we've had the conversation a lot today about the risk of water and people having their own systems. My question though was actually, why are we not having the workshop with the Bluff Community Board?
I can answer that because I did suggest that and they
Yeah.
preferred to have it by themselves.
Okay. Well, I wonder why, but we're not that scary.
Yeah, I think, I
Yeah.
don't know, you were there, Erin, but I did propose that they come and
Yeah.
I seen real value in it. And,
So do I.
But equally, I think I took it that they just want to really understand this. They sense the importance to their community and they want this sort of breathing space to be able to sort of give good consideration to it. That's what I took from it. So
Yeah, and that's
Is
what
there-
I took from it
It was
also,
purely
was that
that.
ability for the community board to debate, sort out what they thought, and then come as a united front,
Yeah.
rather than sitting in the room and trying to figure that out amongst a broader group as well.
and to be really well informed, because it's an
Yeah.
important issue. So that was where they landed.
Yeah.
Tom.
Again, probably an Evelyn's point. I mean, given the huge demand that we've got for capital in the next decade, I think we've got a capital plan that's, was 880 million or something like that in the next 10 years. And therefore, you know, the most elegant solution for the additional water supply might be, you know, unaffordable actually, or we might consider it unaffordable. So I guess the point I would make is that it might be the perfect opportunity for a public-private partnership, given that they can bring capital at the table that we might struggle to provide ourselves.
Yeah, there's definitely, we've got to investigate the synergies. Okay, no further discussion. Thank you for respecting the standing orders, two people. Can I have a mover and a second to receive the report, please?
Amen.
Thanks, Tom. And Alex, second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, we do have public excluded sessions, so it's regarding minutes to the public excluded session of infrastructure. Can I have a mover and seconded for moving us into, thanks Alex, seconded Peter. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. You can have